So we're talking about conflict today. We're talking about fighting, right? And how many times have you heard, like, if you are fighting all the time, then things aren't good. Like,
conflict is bad. Conflict
yeah.
is unhealthy. I think people say that because nobody likes conflict.
Yeah, totally. It's uncomfortable.
Yeah. So people say, well, it's like bragging rights. Oh, I never fight with my partner.
Yeah.
And people somehow put those relationships on a pedestal.
Yeah. Those relationships scare us. We're like, something's not quite right here. Yeah.
Because conflict is really what helps you to learn about each other, what helps you to get it better the next time, what helps you to know what's okay and what's not okay in your relationship. So if you're not having conflict, if you're not fighting, then really it's just a lot of this.
That's her, under the rug, sweep under the rug hand signals. She likes that one. And we often say, right, Lisa, like if you're not fighting in your relationship, you're not fighting for your relationship. And here's the other thing with fighting is that when you're fighting, it gives you an opportunity in your relationship to be vulnerable, to share what really matters to you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's important. It's necessary. And once people realize that and then they learn how to do it, that's where truly successful relationships that's where they come from.
That's where they come from. Because then you can start to build trust, right?
Yeah.
You build trust in conflict by learning that you can repair. You can disagree with your partner and still come back.
Yes. That's such a good point. Most people, again, why they fear and avoid conflict is because when they've attempted to do it, they end up further apart, ignoring each other for days and then not talking about it again for 6 months until the next fight, or maybe 6 weeks. But there's
not
these patterns, right?
Yeah. Like you said, when you learn how to do it in a way that can be effective and successful, conflict can lead to connection.
Yeah. And so what do we see happening for couples that do get into fights that don't end well? Yeah. A lot of the time we see couples that are they're pulling up to, the driveway
I already know what you're going to say.
Of their friend's house for dinner, and then, they turn to their partner and like, by the way, sweetie, like I really didn't like, how the way that you talked to me this morning before you left the house. Right? And so they try to like bring up the conflict at the most inopportune time.
Yeah. It's like, how then do we jump out of the car and head into the place we're supposed to go into when that's what just got like dumped. Yeah. The same thing, another good one that I've talked to so many clients about is like, everything seemed fine. It was the morning, we had breakfast, and then, he was on his way out the door, and I just said to him, like, I'd really appreciate it if you came home on time today because you weren't on time the last couple of nights. And he's like, what? Like, do I leave now? Are we having a conversation? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Not cool.
Not cool.
Another thing that we see couples do all the time is just not really give a whole lot of thought into the conversation they're about to have, right? So what do I really want to say to my partner? What's the important piece here? Mm-hmm. And are we set up for success? Like, are we in a place that we can actually have a conversation? Are we going into someone's house, or do we have 10 or 15 minutes to actually discuss this, right? This one always drives Lisa crazy when I say it, but if I'm hungry, I don't want to have a fight with anyone because I'm going to be super aggro and mean.
It's true. Like having those the timing and the setup and not being tired and not being hungry. But in reality, life happens and things come up, and sometimes they come up at inopportune times, and maybe you are hungry, maybe you are tired. So let's talk about some of the mistakes that people make, once they're in the fight.
Okay.
Because if you think about it, once it's started, once you put that on the table, like you've been late the last entire week, or then the conversation's happening. It might not be the best timing, but what are some of the mistakes that we see clients making all the time once the conversation has started?
Okay. There's so many.
I know.
There's so many. Where do we start?
Yeah. So one that I see happen a lot is what I would call stacking, right? So they bring up something, and then instead of just focusing on that one thing that their partner did, they throw out 10 other things that they also did. It's like they're finally having the conversation, so they want to get it all out. And then it's impossible to stay focused on that one thing.
Yeah.
Because they're talking about like 5 different things, and it sends their partner into either a stress response where they're like fight, flight, freeze, appease, or more likely they go right into fight, like prove and defend.
Yeah.
It gets them on the offense back to their partner, not really listening, not really being able to hear them.
Yeah, that was a lot. That was a lot of things that people did wrong in that one little bucket there. But let's give an example of that. Like, even using something that I said earlier, like, you've been late every night this week, and it's been really frustrating because, I've cooked dinner and it's ready at 6 and you're getting in the door at 7 every day and everything's cold and we didn't get to eat with you. The kids are angry. And you know what? Like, it's really frustrating too that you also just you leave all your clothes on the floor around the hamper. I have to pick them up every day from the hamper. And why are your dishes on the counter? Because it's so easy to just put them in the dishwasher. And have you noticed that I've taken out the garbage every day this week? And have you taken out the garbage? Stacking.
Yeah. So that does not open up a conversation. It doesn't allow the partner to really hear you or even be empathetic with your perspective, because it's like they're just gonna get completely overwhelmed and flooded with all the stuff that you're dumping on them.
Yeah.
Right? So keep it to one topic at a time.
Yeah.
Would be our advice on that. Mm-hmm. Stick to that topic and don't stack. And the other thing that we see people doing all the time is bringing up stuff from the past, mm-hmm. right? So say it's something that their partner has done, then they talk about how they did it 2 years ago and then 2 years before that. And remember in 1982 when this also happened, right? And so that's a different form of stacking, right? Where it feels like they're keeping track of all the times that this partner has wronged them in this way.
Yeah. And it's hard to come back from that one in particular, because you're like, haven't we talked about this? And the thing with that is, that's often the case, is that you're having fights that you have talked about over and over again. And usually that happens because whoever's bringing them up isn't really feeling like they got heard the last time, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we often hear, the partner who is kind of feels like they're being nagged, and it's being when are you going to forgive me for this? When can we stop talking about this?
Yeah.
And that's such a good point, Lynn's. You're not going to stop talking about it until it feels like you've reached resolution.
Yeah.
And your partner won't feel like you've reached resolution until they feel like you really understand their perspective, like you've empathized with them and maybe made efforts to change it going forward.
Yeah, and that takes practice and a skill set, right? Mm-hmm. On that same kind of note, Lise, why don't people feel like their perspective is heard? I think, again, another thing that people do wrong in the fight, during the fight, is that they want to be right.
Yes. Oh, competitive fighting, right?
Yeah.
And you think about how we grew up too, sibling rivalry, that's how you got heard, in your house, in your family was the loudest one, the most aggressive tone, the squeaky wheel.
How can you tell that she had a lot of siblings?
5 siblings, right? And so, when we got into an argument, it was never about trying to understand the other person's perspective. It was how can I be heard? How can everyone understand that I am right?
Yeah. And the thing with that is that I guarantee when you're in that state of mind of how do I get heard? How do I get everyone to see that my way is right, my thought is right? You aren't listening to anything. You have not heard anything that anyone else has said. And the most important part of communication, the most important part of conflict is listening.
It's true.
It is true.
Yeah. We talk about that a lot in all of our courses, learning how to listen. It's such a skill that is not natural to most of us, right?
Yeah.
We think that good communication is all about articulating ourselves and articulating our needs, and that is an important part, but learning how to listen to your partner how to reflect back, how to empathize, how to see their perspective, is a skill.
It is a skill. Yeah. Another thing that takes practice, but practice worth doing. Yeah. So we've kind of talked, Lise, about like a lot of the things we see clients doing wrong as they kind of lead up to conflict or talking about things that are important or really matter to them. And then we've talked about a few things that go wrong while they're fighting, kind of ways that they get stuck. What happens after a fight?
Well, actually what came to mind when you were saying that is where do we go wrong towards the end of a fight?
Yeah.
And I would say that I've had so many couples that I've worked with that come to me and say, we fought for 3 hours about this.
Whoa.
We fought for 2 hours about this. It was like 10 p.m. when it started, and we didn't go to sleep till 1 a.m. And by the way, after that, I didn't even sleep anyways.
Right.
So we hear this a lot. So
Marathon fighting.
Yeah. So I think that knowing when to end the conversation is also something that's really important, and people don't get because they're trying so hard to say the same thing over and over again. Their partner isn't hearing them. And so it's almost like 2 hours of the same shit going back and forth between each other that they've been saying for the first 10 minutes. It's like on repeat. And so
broken record. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You know why I think people do that a lot of the time is that they're not fighting enough. And so maybe they have these blow-ups like once a month and they're like, holy shit, we're actually talking. I got to get it all out and I'm not letting this end until we like you said, resolve something. And so as you learn to really like embrace fighting, embrace conflict, embrace hard conversations, you won't be scared that you're never going to have a chance to talk about this again.
Yes, so true.
Yeah.
And you won't need to like hog the mic so much during that time, right? Because really like effective conflict and communication is about like taking turns on the mic.
Yeah.
And saying like, okay, what are your grievances? I'm going to sit here and actively listen and be in tune and hopefully make you feel seen and heard.
Yeah.
But if I'm just waiting to talk, if I'm just waiting to get my point across, if I'm just competitively fighting or trying to be right, then we're never going to reach resolution, right? We're never going to repair from that.
Yeah. And so the word you just threw out there, repair, that's kind of where my head was going in terms of like, what do people do after a fight, right? So
ignore each other for a week and then never talk about it again.
Obviously, do the right, like okay, so we talked about that.
Let's just stonewall.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just not going to talk to them. Like they did not hear me or understand me. Like,
And then we talk to those clients 3 or 4 days later, and they say, "Well, my partner's acting like nothing ever happened, but I'm still feeling angry, resentful, and hurt. But they seem like everything's okay." And this is so normal. This happens a lot because. Like, ask yourself right now, like, are you the kind of person that can forgive easily? Like, something happens, your feelings get hurt, and, like, the next day, you're feeling totally fine. You forgive them, right?
Are you that kind of person?
I am. Okay. Are you?
It really depends on the situation, on, like, not the person that I'm dealing with, but on what the topic is.
Okay. Yeah. Good point.
Yeah.
Or are you the kind of person that when your feelings have been hurt, and you've been upset in an argument, you hold on to it. You feel more raw and more vulnerable, and like it's harder to even like look at the person or be close to them, and you end up like wanting to kind of like turtle or protect yourself, and then you feel like it's unresolved, and you feel like you're not super forgiving. I would say more people fall into that category than the super forgiving. But whether you're somebody who holds a grudge and stays sort of resentful towards their partner or their friend or their parent, or you're someone that forgives easily, chances are you're married or in a relationship with someone who's different from you.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah. Which then ends at exactly
the scenario that
right? You just described.
One person's totally fine and wanting to like make sweet, sweet love and move on, and the other person's like, we haven't resolved that fight from the other day, and I'm not going to even kiss you or look at you until we do.
Yeah, and we talked at the beginning of this video about how conflict can create trust. Well, what you just described there is the opposite of that. You're really starting to create this pattern with your partner where they don't feel like they can trust you because you've moved on without hearing them, without resolving what you've started, right?
Yeah. I love that point. So that not only do they not trust their partner, but they also don't necessarily trust themselves.
Yeah.
Right?
Or the process of conflict.
Right? Yeah. Because they were vulnerable. They said the piece, the painful piece that was hard to say, and then nothing happened with it. They didn't feel seen or heard. That didn't get resolved. Their feelings are still hurt. So maybe the next time, you know, one of two things will happen. The next time they say less and they don't try as hard to get their point made, or, and this probably happens more often, they get louder, they get more aggressive, they get more vocal, they get mean, we get into like name calling, and that's where, you know, that's a dark path to go down, right? Because once you've you know, called your partner all the names in the book, and you know, you can't go back from that.
No, you can't take that back.
Yeah.
It's been said and heard.
Yeah. And so that's what we see a lot, is couples getting so frustrated that their conflict cycle is not getting them anywhere, that they try new ways that are worse.
Yeah.
So shutting down even more or being even more aggressive.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think we've laid it out there, all the things that people do wrong. And then afterwards, not repairing, not coming back together to create that connection. So there's all the things not to do.
So now that you've heard all the things what not to do, and where couples kind of get stuck and, you know, trip over each other in the conflict cycle, you know, here's just a couple things for you to consider. Think about the setup. Think about, you know, when you're trying to have this conversation with your partner, and make sure that you can give them your undivided attention and that you're not rushing off to something else.
Yeah. Focus on the listening. Instead of trying to think about what the next thing is you're going to say, really come up with maybe a rule or something that you and your partner agree to, where you get to share the mic, where the mic gets to go back and forth, so that when your partner has the mic, you can really be focused on listening.
Yeah. And while they're talking, you're thinking about them and their situation, and really trying to empathize with and sympathize with their perspective, as opposed to trying to be right and trying to prove and defend your point of view.
Yeah. And as Lisa mentioned, know when to turn the conversation off. Marathon fighting doesn't help anyone. So when you start to recognize that you're saying the same things, or your partner's saying the same things over and over, when you're starting to recognize that, you know, nothing's landing anymore, then maybe make a decision that, you know what, like, let's stop talking about this now. But that doesn't mean we have to stop talking about it for forever.
Yeah. When you've stopped being the best version of yourself, when you've stopped being able to listen, when things have escalated to a point where you know that you're not going to be heard and you're unable to hear your partner, it's best to end it. And that's why we teach all of our couples an exit strategy, because it's important to know when to end it amicably. And to Lindsay's point, then you create a plan for when to reconnect and when to start the conversation again.
Yeah. Which makes sure that you avoid the...
So good luck and happy fighting.